I've been carrying this story inside me for 5 years now, and I'm finally ready to tell it. Not because I want to, but because I have to. Because what happened to us in those woods wasn't random, and I'm starting to think it's happening to others too. My name is Alex, and I was 17 when everything went wrong. It was supposed to be our last adventure before senior year started. Me, my best friends Marcus and Tyler, and the Morrison twins, Emma and Chloe. We'd been planning this camping trip all summer, 3 days in the Blackwood National Forest, about 2 hours north of our hometown in Michigan. Just the 5 of us, no parents, no responsibilities. What could go wrong? Marcus had found a spot online, some forum post about a hidden campsite near Devil's Hollow. Yeah, I know how that sounds now, but we were 17 and thought it was just a cool name. The guy who posted about it said it was the perfect place for teenagers to camp without running into park rangers or other campers. Secluded, peaceful, with a natural spring for fresh water. It sounded ideal. We borrowed Tyler's older brother's Jeep and loaded it with enough supplies for a week, even though we were only planning to stay 3 nights. Emma had packed like we were heading to Alaska, sleeping bags, lanterns, enough food to feed an army. Chloe kept making jokes about how we were going to get eaten by bears, but she was excited too. We all were. The drive up was perfect. Windows down, music loud, that feeling of freedom you only get when you're young and summer stretches endlessly ahead of you. We must have looked like every cliché teenage movie, 5 kids heading into the woods with no idea what was waiting for them. The trailhead was harder to find than we expected. Marcus's directions led us down increasingly narrow dirt roads until we finally found a small gravel parking area that looked like it hadn't been used in months. There was no official sign, no trail markers, just a barely visible path disappearing into the thick forest. "You sure this is right?" Tyler asked, checking his phone for the 5th time. "No signal, of course." Marcus consulted his printed directions. Yeah, he'd actually printed them out like some kind of outdoors expert. "This has to be it." Guy said to look for the old cedar with the lightning scar. And there it was, a massive cedar tree split down the middle by what looked like an old lightning strike, forming a natural archway over the trail entrance. It was actually pretty cool, like something out of a fantasy movie. The hike-in was tougher than we expected. The trail was overgrown and hard to follow, weaving through dense forest that seemed to get darker with every step. Ancient trees towered over us, their canopies so thick that even though it was only mid-afternoon, it felt like dusk beneath the branches. "This is so much better than sitting at home watching Netflix," Emma said, adjusting her overstuffed backpack for the 10th time. She was trying to stay positive, but I could tell she was already getting tired. Chloe, who was in much better shape from track team, was practically bouncing along the trail. "Come on, Em, think of the Instagram pics we're gonna get. This place is gorgeous." And it was beautiful, in that deep, old forest way that makes you feel small and connected to something ancient at the same time. Massive Douglas firs and hemlocks stretched up like cathedral pillars, and the forest floor was carpeted with that perfect mix of moss and fallen needles that muffles every sound. But there was something else too, something I didn't really notice at first. The forest was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, dead quiet. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals, no buzzing insects. Just our footsteps and our voices echoing strangely among the trees. After about 2 hours of hiking, Marcus stopped and checked his directions again. "Should be right around here somewhere," he said, but he sounded less confident than before. That's when Tyler spotted it, a narrow side trail, barely visible, branching off to the left. It wasn't marked on any of our maps, but it was the only path we'd seen in the last hour. "This has got to be it," Marcus said, and we followed him down the side trail. The path led us deeper into the forest, winding between trees that seemed to grow larger and older with every step. The air grew cooler, heavier, and that strange silence deepened. Even Chloe stopped chattering, and Emma had gone pale, though she claimed it was just from the exertion. After another 30 minutes, the trail opened into a clearing that took our breath away. It was perfect, a natural meadow about 50 feet across, surrounded by a ring of enormous old trees. The ground was mostly level, covered in soft grass, with a small stream running along one edge. Exactly what we'd been hoping to find. Holy shit, Tyler breathed. This is incredible. It really was. The clearing felt almost magical, like something out of a fairy tale. Late afternoon sunlight filtered down through gaps in the canopy, creating natural spotlights across the grass. The stream bubbled quietly along its rocky bed, and for the first time since we'd entered the forest, we could hear normal sounds, water flowing, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves above us. We set up camp quickly, eager to enjoy what was left of the daylight. Marcus and Tyler pitched their tent on one side of the clearing, while Emma, Chloe, and I set up on the other side. The girls had insisted I share their tent, for protection, Chloe had said with a grin, though we all knew it was just because they didn't want to be alone in the woods. As we worked, I kept noticing things about the clearing that seemed almost too perfect. The ring of trees was remarkably uniform, creating natural windbreaks on all sides. The stream was positioned perfectly for easy access to water. Even the ground seemed unusually level for a natural meadow. It's like someone designed this place, I mentioned to Marcus as we gathered firewood. He laughed. Dude, you're overthinking it. Sometimes nature just gets it right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the clearing was somehow intentional. The trees were all ancient, easily hundreds of years old, but they formed such a perfect circle around the meadow that it looked planned. And the silence that had followed us through the forest seemed to stop at the clearing's edge. Here, we could hear normal forest sounds again. We spent the evening doing typical camping stuff, cooking over our camp stove, telling stories, playing cards by lantern light. Emma had brought marshmallows, and we built a small fire to roast them. For a few hours, everything felt perfect. We were living our teenage adventure movie fantasy. But as full darkness settled over the forest, things started to feel different. The first thing I noticed was how absolute the darkness was outside our circle of firelight. Most places, even in the woods, you can see something once your eyes adjust: starlight, moonlight, the faint glow of distant towns. But beyond our fire, the darkness was complete, like a black wall surrounding our camp. Jesus, you can't see anything out there, Tyler said, echoing my thoughts. He'd gotten up to use the bathroom behind some trees and came back looking unsettled. It's like the trees just swallow up all the light. The fire was burning well, but its light seemed to only extend about 10 feet before being absorbed by the darkness. We could see the first row of trees around the clearing, their massive trunks flickering in the firelight, but beyond that was nothing. It's kind of creepy, Emma admitted, moving closer to the fire. Like we're on a stage or something, and everything else is just gone. Chloe tried to lighten the mood. Maybe we're the entertainment tonight. Forest Theater, 5 teenagers discover the true meaning of friendship. But even she sounded a little nervous. That's when we heard the first sound from the darkness. It was subtle at first, a soft rustling, like wind moving through leaves. But there was no wind. The air in the clearing was perfectly still, so still that our fire burned straight up without flickering. Did you guys hear that? I asked. We all went quiet, listening. The rustling came again, circling our camp, moving from tree to tree around the perimeter of the clearing. It sounded like something large moving through the underbrush, but trying to be quiet about it. Probably just a deer, Marcus said, but his voice was tight. Or maybe a raccoon. The rustling stopped for a few minutes, and we started to relax. But then it came back, louder this time, and definitely circling us. Whatever was out there was staying just beyond the reach of our firelight, moving in a slow circle around our camp. Okay, that's not a deer, Tyler said, standing up and grabbing a flashlight. Deer don't circle people like that. He aimed the beam into the darkness, but it was like Jake had described in his story. The light seemed to be swallowed after just a few feet. We could see the first line of trees, but beyond that, nothing. The rustling stopped the moment Tyler turned on the flashlight, like whatever was making it had frozen in place. We waited, barely breathing, but the sound didn't return. "See? Probably just scared it off," Marcus said, but he didn't sound convinced. We tried to go back to our normal camping activities, but the mood had changed. Every few minutes, someone would glance toward the tree, listening for sounds that didn't come. The darkness felt watchful now, like something was studying us from just beyond our vision. When we finally decided to turn in for the night, none of us wanted to be the first to leave the safety of the fire. We banked it carefully, making sure it would burn for several more hours, and retreated to our tents. I lay in my sleeping bag between Emma and Chloe, listening to their whispered conversation about whether we should have brought bear spray. Outside, the forest had returned to that unnatural silence, no insects, no night birds, no small animals moving through the underbrush. But just as I was finally drifting off to sleep, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices, soft and distant, coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond our camp. I couldn't make out words, but they sounded like people talking, maybe arguing. Multiple voices, both male and female, having some kind of conversation just outside the range of understanding. I lay there listening, trying to decide if I should wake the others, when the voices suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was even more complete than before, like the forest was holding its breath. That's when I heard Emma whisper, "Alex? Are you awake?" "Yeah," I whispered back. "Did you hear those voices?" My heart sank. "You heard them too?" From the other sleeping bag, Chloe's voice joined us. We both heard them. What the hell was that? Before I could answer, we heard Marcus calling softly from the other tent. "Guys? You awake over there?" "We're awake," I called back quietly. "Did you hear people talking?" The five of us had all heard the voices. That meant it wasn't imagination, wasn't some trick of the wind or the forest. There had been people out there in the darkness, having a conversation just beyond our camp. But who would be hiking in these woods at night? And why hadn't they approached our fire or called out a greeting? We lay there in our tents, listening to the oppressive silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer alone in this perfect clearing. Something had found us, and it was waiting just beyond the reach of our dying firelight. None of us slept that first night. We lay in our tents, listening to a silence so complete it felt like the world had ended beyond our little clearing. Every few minutes, someone would whisper, "Did you hear that?" but there was never anything to hear. That was almost worse than if there had been sounds. Around 3 a.m., I heard Tyler getting up. "Where are you going?" Marcus whispered urgently. "I need to piss, man. I can't hold it anymore." "Don't go far." "I'm not stupid." I heard Tyler's footsteps moving away from the tents, toward the edge of the clearing. For about 30 seconds, everything was normal. Then Tyler's voice cut through the darkness, sharp with panic. "Guys! Guys! Get out here! Now!" We all scrambled out of our tents at the same time. Tyler was standing about 20 feet away, near the tree, his flashlight beam pointed at the ground. When we reached him, I saw what had made him panic. Footprints. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, circling our entire campsite. They were pressed deep into the soft earth around the clearing's perimeter, and they were fresh, so fresh that some still had moisture seeping into the depressions. But here's what made my skin crawl: they weren't animal tracks. They were human footprints, bare feet, but wrong somehow. Too wide, too long, with what looked like extra toes or maybe claw marks extending beyond where the big toe should be. "What the fuck is this?" Chloe breathed, grabbing onto Emma's arm. Marcus knelt down beside one of the clearest prints. "These are huge. Like, size 15, maybe bigger. And look at this." He pointed to the impression. The toes are spread out like someone who's never worn shoes. "Maybe it's some kind of local tribe," Emma suggested weakly. "Like, people who live off the grid." But even as she said it, we all knew it didn't make sense. The prints were too uniform, too numerous. It would take dozens of people to make this many tracks, and they'd all have to have the same unusual foot shape. Tyler swept his flashlight beam along the circle of footprints. They go all the way around. Like they were, dancing around us while we slept. The thought made me sick. While we'd been lying in our tents, worried about voices in the darkness, unknown people had been circling our camp, leaving tracks in the soft earth. How had we not heard them? "We need to get out of here," Emma said, her voice shaking. "This is fucked up. We need to pack up and leave right now." "It's the middle of the night," Marcus pointed out. "We'd never find the trail in the dark." "Then we wait for daylight and leave first thing," Tyler said. "I don't care how cool this place is. Something's not right here." We all agreed. The magic of our perfect camping spot had been completely shattered. But as we stood there in our little circle of flashlight beams, discussing our escape plans, Chloe asked the question that had been growing in the back of my mind. Why didn't they approach us? If there are people living out here, why sneak around us like that? Why not just say hello? Nobody had an answer for that. And the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. Normal people don't circle campers in the middle of the night without making contact. Normal people don't leave dozens of identical footprints and then vanish without a trace. We tried to go back to our tents, but none of us could even pretend to sleep. We sat around the dying fire, feeding it sticks to keep it burning, and waited for dawn. The darkness beyond our light seemed to press in on us, and every few minutes one of us would think we saw movement in the tree line. "There," Emma whispered, pointing toward a gap between two massive trees. "Did you see that?" We all stared, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. But then Tyler saw something on the other side of the clearing. And Marcus thought he caught movement near the stream. We were starting to jump at shadows, but the alternative, that we were actually seeing things moving in the darkness, was too frightening to consider. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When the first gray light finally started filtering through the canopy, we began packing immediately. Nobody talked about breakfast or coffee or any of the normal morning camping routines. We just wanted out. But as we rolled up our sleeping bags and broke down the tents, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The footprints were gone. "Hey," I called to the others. "Look at the ground." Where dozens of clear footprints had been pressed into the earth just hours before, there was nothing. The ground around our campsite was smooth, undisturbed, covered with the normal layer of fallen leaves and forest debris. "That's impossible," Tyler said, walking to the exact spot where he'd first seen the tracks. "They were right here. Deep impressions, clear as day." We searched the entire perimeter of the clearing. Not a single footprint remained. It was like they'd never existed at all. "Maybe we imagined them," Emma suggested, but her voice was shaky. "Maybe we were so freaked out by the voices that we saw things that weren't there." But all 5 of us had seen them. All 5 of us had examined them with flashlights, had knelt down and studied the strange shape of the toes, had followed the circular pattern around our camp. Mass hallucination doesn't work like that. "The ground's been smoothed," Chloe observed. She was right. The earth around the clearing looked almost groomed, like someone had carefully erased all evidence of the night's visitors. We finished packing in record time, but when Marcus consulted his directions for the hike out, we hit another problem. "Which way did we come in?" he asked, looking around the clearing with confusion. That stopped all of us cold. The clearing was surrounded by massive trees, with several gaps between them that could have been trail entrances. In daylight, they all looked identical. "We came from that direction," Tyler said, pointing toward what he thought was the entrance. "No, it was over there," Emma disagreed, pointing in almost the opposite direction. I tried to remember, but the more I thought about it, the less certain I became. The clearing was perfectly round, the trees evenly spaced. Without distinctive landmarks, every gap looked like it could be the way we'd entered. "Okay, don't panic," Marcus said, though he sounded panicked himself. "We'll find it. One of these has to be the right trail." We tried the gap Tyler had identified first. There was indeed a faint path leading into the forest, but after 10 minutes of hiking, it petered out into nothing but dense undergrowth. We backtracked and tried Emma's choice. Same result, a path that seemed promising at first but then disappeared into trackless forest. By the time we'd tested 4 different routes, it was past noon and we were all getting scared. Each path looked like it should be the right one, but none of them led anywhere. It was like the forest was playing tricks on us, offering false hope before dead-ending us in impassable thickets. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus said, studying his printed directions for the 100th time. "We came from somewhere. There has to be a way out." But there wasn't. Or at least, we couldn't find it. Every gap between the trees led to a path that went nowhere. We were trapped in our perfect circular clearing, surrounded by ancient trees that seemed to be watching us with patient malevolence. That's when Chloe made the observation that sent chills down all our spines. "Has anyone noticed that there are more trees now?" We all looked around the clearing. She was right. The ring of massive trees seemed denser than it had been when we'd arrived. The gaps were smaller, fewer in number. It was subtle, but undeniable, the forest was closing in on us. "Trees don't move," Tyler said, but his voice was uncertain. "Then explain this," Chloe shot back. "Yesterday there were maybe 8 or 10 big trees around the clearing. Now I count at least 15. We spent the rest of the afternoon in increasingly desperate attempts to find a way out. But every path led nowhere, and the clearing seemed to be slowly shrinking. The ring of trees was definitely tighter, the gaps between them narrower. As evening approached, we had to face the terrible truth: we were going to have to spend another night in this place. "Someone will come looking for us," Emma said, trying to stay positive. "Tyler's brother knows where we were going." But Tyler shook his head. "I just told him we were camping in Blackwood. The directions Marcus found weren't from any official source. Nobody knows about this specific place." We set up our tents again, this time keeping them close together in the center of the clearing. As darkness fell, we built up the fire higher than before, using more wood than we could really afford. We needed the light, needed something to hold back the oppressive darkness that pressed in from all sides. That's when we heard them again, the voices. But this time, they were closer. Much closer. And there were more of them. The conversation seemed to be happening just beyond the tree line, a low murmur of multiple people talking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out individual words, but the cadence was definitely human speech. Questions and answers, agreements and disagreements, the natural flow of group discussion. "Should we try to make contact?" Marcus whispered. "Are you insane?" Tyler hissed back. "After the footprint thing? After the way the trails disappeared? Whatever's out there, it's not trying to help us." The voices continued for about an hour, moving around the perimeter of our clearing. Sometimes they seemed to be directly behind one tree, sometimes behind another. It was like a group of people was circling our camp, having a meeting about us while staying just out of sight. Then, around midnight, something changed. The voices stopped their circular pattern and seemed to converge on one spot, directly across the clearing from our fire. The murmuring became more animated, more urgent, like they were arguing about something. And then, clear as day, I heard my name. Alex. It wasn't shouted or called out. It was spoken in a normal conversational tone, as if someone was talking about me rather than to me. But in the absolute silence of the forest night, it carried perfectly across the clearing. Emma grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "Did they just say your name?" Before I could answer, we heard Marcus's name. Then Tyler's. Then Emma's and Chloe's. One by one, spoken in that same conversational tone, like someone was reading from a list. "They know who we are," Chloe whispered, her face pale in the firelight. The voices went quiet after that, but somehow the silence was worse than the talking had been. We huddled around our fire, afraid to sleep, afraid to move, afraid to do anything but wait for whatever was going to happen next. That's when we noticed the trees again. In the flickering firelight, they seemed to be moving, not swaying in the wind, because there was no wind, but actually moving. Shifting position, leaning inward, getting closer to our shrinking circle of safety. "This isn't real," Emma kept repeating. "This can't be real." But it was real. And as the night wore on, the trees continued their slow advance, the clearing continued to shrink, and somewhere in the darkness beyond our fire, voices that knew our names continued their patient, unseen conference about our fate. By 3 a.m., the clearing had shrunk to maybe half its original size. The ancient trees loomed over us now, their massive trunks forming an almost perfect circle just beyond the reach of our firelight. We sat back to back in the center, feeding our dwindling supply of wood to the flames, knowing that when the fire died, we'd be left in complete darkness with whatever was out there. That's when Tyler broke. "I can't do this anymore," he said, standing up abruptly. "I'm going to talk to them. Whatever they are, whatever they want, this waiting is killing me." "Tyler, don't," Marcus started, but Tyler was already walking toward the tree line, his hands raised in what he probably thought was a universal gesture of peace. "Hello," he called out into the darkness. "We can hear you talking. We're not trying to cause trouble. We just want to leave." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the normal forest sounds, the ones we've been missing all along, seemed to hold their breath. Then Tyler screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear or pain, but something worse, a scream of recognition, of understanding something so terrible that his mind couldn't process it. The sound cut through the night like a knife, then stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence that felt like death itself. Tyler was gone. Not hidden by darkness, not dragged away, simply gone, as if he'd never existed. The space where he'd been standing was empty, undisturbed. The rest of us pressed closer together, our backs to the fire, watching the tree lean with desperate intensity. But there was nothing to see. The darkness beyond our shrinking circle of light was complete and impenetrable. "We have to stay together," Marcus whispered. "Whatever happens, we don't separate." But as he spoke, I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. The fire was burning lower, and no matter how much wood we fed it, the flames kept shrinking. It wasn't running out of fuel, the wood was just, not burning properly anymore, as if the very nature of combustion was being slowly drained from our little pocket of reality. "The fire's going out," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "It can't," Chloe replied, but we all knew it was happening. The flames that had been our lifeline, our only defense against the encroaching darkness, were dying despite our efforts to keep them alive. As the fire dimmed to barely more than glowing embers, the voices returned. But this time they weren't coming from the tree line, they were coming from above us, from the canopy that we couldn't see in the darkness. The murmuring was different now, more purposeful, more ritualistic. Like a ceremony was beginning, and we were the unwilling centerpiece. Then, in the dying light of our fire, we saw them. They weren't people. They had never been people. Pale figures began to descend from the trees, moving with an impossible fluidity that hurt to watch. They looked almost human at first glance, bipedal, roughly the right proportions, but as they got closer, the wrongness became undeniable. Their limbs were too long, their joints bent in directions that shouldn't be possible, and their faces. Their faces were human faces, but not their own. I recognized Tyler's face on one of the descending figures, but stretched and distorted, like a mask that didn't quite fit. Another wore what looked like Emma's face, but with eyes that were too large and too knowing. "They collect us," Marcus whispered, his voice barely human with terror. "They wear us." The figures formed a circle around our dying fire, close enough now that we could see the details we wished we couldn't. Their bodies were wrong in ways that my mind struggled to process, skin that looked like bark in some places and moss in others, fingers that were too long and ended in what might have been roots or claws. But the faces were the worst part. Human faces, familiar faces, faces that might have belonged to other campers who'd found this place, worn like trophies by things that had never been human at all. One of them, the one wearing Tyler's face, stepped forward and spoke in Tyler's voice, but the words that came out were all wrong. "Welcome to the Grove," it said, tilting its head at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "You've been such good guests. We've enjoyed watching you sleep, listening to your dreams, learning your shapes." The fire finally died completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. But somehow, impossibly, we could still see the pale figures surrounding us, as if they generated their own sickly light. "Please," Emma sobbed, "we just want to go home." The thing wearing Tyler's face smiled with Tyler's mouth, and the expression was so perfectly mimicked yet so fundamentally wrong that it was worse than any monster face could have been. "But you are home," it said. "You've always been home. The Grove accepts all who find it, adds them to its collection. Your faces will join our family, your voices will join our choir, and your footsteps will dance our midnight circles for all the seasons to come." More figures began to emerge from the darkness between the trees, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all wearing human faces like masks, all moving with that impossible, wrong-jointed fluidity. The clearing that had seemed empty was suddenly crowded with ancient, patient watchers who had been there all along, invisible in their stillness. I felt myself beginning to lose grip on reality as I recognized face after face in the crowd, people I'd known in school, strangers from photographs, even my own reflection staring back at me from one of the pale, wrong-bodied figures. "The Grove is eternal," the Tyler thing continued, its voice now joined by a chorus of other stolen voices, creating a harmony that was beautiful and horrible. "It has always been here, between the spaces where reality grows thin. We are its gardeners, its children, its memory. And now you will be too." The last thing I remember clearly was the feeling of roots growing up through the earth beneath us, gentle but inexorable, wrapping around our legs like old friends welcoming us home. The faces in the circle began to shift and change, cycling through their collection of stolen identities, and I realized with a strange, dreamy acceptance that soon my face would be among them. The Grove had waited so patiently for us to find it, and now that we had, it would never let us leave. As consciousness faded, I heard our own voices joining the ancient chorus, welcoming the next group of travelers who would inevitably find their way to this perfect circular clearing, deep in a forest that existed between the cracks of the world, where trees move when no one is watching and faces are currency for things that were never human at all. The Grove remembers everything. The Grove forgets nothing. The Grove is always hungry for new faces to add to its collection.